Hi everyone, my name is James Feeney. Welcome to or back to my channel. Today I am here to share with you guys some of my favorite reference books and ones that I would recommend on various topics. These are things that I continually go back to check in on certain things or when I have questions, and books that I use in tarot and magic and certain, I would say, metaphysical categories, and they've been tried and true for me, and I know that there are a lot out there, so it can be overwhelming. So I guess in offering my recommendations and my favorites, hopefully this will help you guys to make informed purchases, and also if any of these sound appealing based on the information that I provide, hopefully that can help you guys as well, or if you're looking for some yourselves. And some of them are more reference in that they wouldn't be books that you would read front to back, and some of them actually are books that are both reference and ones that I personally have read from cover to cover. So I'll share a bit about that. It'll be almost like a small review. There are a lot to get through, so I'll try to make this quick. And I will try to do timestamps. I'm not really familiar with that. I guess it's really just knowing what time things happen and not being lazy about marking it. But I'll start with tarot. So if that's what you're here for, tarot is going to be first, and then we're going to move on to astrology, and then the rest are going to be more magical, esoteric in a way. And so that's kind of the order that we're going in, and the end is going to be a lot of various miscellaneous books. For tarot, we have a few. So first with tarot, actually I'll start with this one. First with tarot, and I would say out of all of these, overall, if there had to be just one of the four that I have here, it would be, and sorry, there's light. I have a new lighting situation, so we have a better situation going on, but I guess that ring light does have a nice little glare. But we have Holistic Tarot by Llewelyn. I'm sure if you are a reader and use tarot of any sort, that you are no stranger to this book. And this is one that I would recommend actually reading from front to back, reading the entire book. I think that there's a lot of valuable information in here. I think that in reading this, I stepped up my tarot game quite a bit. It's not one that's easy to get through. I believe it's over 800 pages. Yes. So it does take some time, although it's not dense and hard to understand. It's just quite long. And in here you have the definitions, you have tarot spreads, you have learning how to read for yourself and others. It is primarily based around Rider-Waite Smith style decks and that system, so if that's not the system you're working with, this is not going to be as helpful. I think that there's a lot in here that I continue to go back to, and if there was just one, it would be this one. So definitions, spreads, how to read, correspondences, so much in here, just so much. So very valuable book. My most valuable tarot for Rider-Waite Smith, at least. So we'll do Rider-Waite Smith first, and the next one I have is, this is going to be like the quick one. This is a Tarot for Beginners, A Practical Guide to Reading the Cards by Barbara Moore. And these are part of those for beginner books that they have regarding a lot of metaphysical, magical, divinatory type topics. So this would be the tarot one, and it was my first tarot book, and the only one I had for at least the first year, if not more. And really, this is just a great one for the meanings. So this is more so for a beginner, but if you just want to revisit it, I have reread it in recent times and found it to be really fun. So a quick reference, but one mostly just to do with the meanings for Rider-Waite Smith, and it's nice, quick, sweet, to the point. Okay, next for Rider-Waite Smith, and the last one I have for that is Llewelyn's complete book of Rider-Waite Smith Tarot, and this is by there's a foreword by Stuart R. Kaplan, but it's really but the actual author of the entirety is Sasha Graham. And a journey through the history, meaning, and use of the world's most famous deck. So we have that, and I've mentioned this one before. I think I mentioned all of these books at some point before. But if you're looking for history, a little bit of a biography on the people like Pamela Coleman Smith and Rider-Waite and the publishing and all that, that's in here. There's also, of course, all of the meanings, and I think that these meanings are the most comprehensive, and you'll get some background on the actual art and where it may be derived from, whether that be Marseille or Solabusca. And there's a lot in terms of correspondences, and so I think that this one's actually the best for referencing the meanings. They're not short meanings like the last one I mentioned. They're longer, but it is the most detailed, and I tend to agree with these meanings or resonate with these meanings more than the other books. So there's that. There's also spreads for every single card. I think I mentioned this before, but in the back, all of the 78 cards have their own spread, and the spreads are based around the meanings of the cards. So you can use them for yourself, but it'll play on the symbols and the sort of archetype that the card embodies. So that's really valuable as well. And of course there's the intro, and I think it's a great primer and history of a sort for Rider-Waite Smith tarot system, so that's a great one for that. Next we'll go to, this is my go-to for Thoth. I'm relatively new to Thoth and just began that more so in the later half of 2019, and so I don't have many books under my belt, but I wouldn't recommend the Book of Thoth as a reference book. I find that when I do reference it, and that happens, I wind up reading it and needing to continue to read multiple pages and think on it, and the purpose of a reference book is to be quick and to answer questions to things that you have or jog your memory for those details, very detail oriented and condensed and concise. So I go to Book M, Liber Mundi by M. Moline when I just need a quick reference, because you get a nice little page or two, you get like 2 pages of highly condensed information on any given card, and so it doesn't take very long. There are keywords, you get all of the correspondences and associations in a really organized fashion. So if there's one reference book that I really like for Thoth Tarot systems, it's this one. So that's that, and I use that a lot. So next we'll do astrology. Again, astrology isn't an area where I would say I'm a seasoned expert. I'm very interested in astrology. I'm continuing to learn astrology. I have more experience with astrology than I do with Thoth, so I didn't just begin my astrology journey in the latter half of 2019, but I wouldn't say that I'm an expert of any sort. But one that I reference a lot, and I've mentioned this on my Instagram, is, and I may have mentioned, no, I didn't mention it in the favorites, no, is Astrology, A Cosmic Science by Isabel M. Hickey, and this is a newer one for me, so this isn't like my first astrology book, like how a lot of those tarot books were the ones that got me introduced and ready and reading in tarot. This isn't what did that for me. However, in having recently read this, I think that this is arguably maybe, I think it's my favorite starter book. This is really for a beginner, but also for people who do know a lot already or are up and going where astrology is concerned. But it takes you through all the basics. It's well organized, very comprehensive. Her writing style is actually what makes it my favorite. So it's a reference in that you can find everything concisely and quickly. It's broken down in a very organized fashion that makes everything easy to find and understand. And then also it's pleasant to read, and the way that she speaks, her tone as a writer, I find very appealing and conversational. There is this element to it where she references God and angels, and I don't take it as a literal reference, because she'll also reference gods and goddesses of various cultures, but she does tend to reference God and heaven, I think, and angels, and the way that she goes about doing it doesn't seem so literal. So for those who are a bit averse to Christianity and monotheistic Abrahamic religions and might see that as a turnoff, I would say maybe push past that a bit, because it doesn't feel as though she means it so literally. Although if that is something that bothers you, it just bothers you. So I guess I'm just mentioning that because at first it was an element of confusion for me in the book, but it wasn't one that perturbed me or turned me off from it. So that's just something to keep in mind, but I think it's a really great one. And next, and this is going to be really obvious in a way if you're into astrology, and this would be just an ephemeris. Everybody who works with astrology in a more regimented, serious fashion would benefit from having an ephemeris of some sort. And I mean, it's quite literally just reference of raw data and information that you might need for given dates and times in astrology. I'm not going to go into more detail than that because it speaks for itself. So that's that, and then next we'll do chakras. Okay, that's what's on top. So I'm not somebody who is super deep into chakras. I don't know so much, but I know a bit. And the first book that I read on chakras was Chakras Plain and Simple by Sasha Fenton, and it apparently claims to be the only book that you'll ever need, and I'm not so sure about that, but what I am sure about is that it is very concise, to the point, and gives you a very comprehensive idea of what each chakra is, and correspondences, how they're used, various aspects to do with it. So, of course, the 7 major chakras, when not all of the chakras, that would really take a large book, but yes, a really great primer and reference for chakras, so I recommend this one for anybody also getting started. This would be one that you'd read front to back. I'm trying to think. So far, the only one in here that I wouldn't necessarily recommend reading front to back would be an ephemeris, unless you really want to torture yourself. But yes, all of these so far would be ones that I personally have read cover to cover, and so now I reference them after that fact, but in just buying them, if you were to get them, they'd be great for reference, and you don't have to read them, of course, front to back, but I would recommend it. So next I have for, I would say, shamanism as far as a magical practice or path, and that is one that I wouldn't say I'm so tied to hard and fast and that I stick with that and there's nothing else, but I would say a lot of my magical practice and workings are shamanic in nature or reference shamanic practices, and that's just how it tends to go. So the one that I reference the most is by Oak, Ash, and Thorn, Modern Celtic Shamanism by DJ Conway. There are tons of books on shamanism. I've read, not quite a few, but I've read some. And as far as ones that just seem really accessible in returning to for quick reference, this one stands out. I don't feel like I have to go back and reread a whole chapter on something. It's concise and broken down into very small sections within a chapter. There are exercises and various definitions of simple things, taking into account that maybe you know nothing about shamanism going into this, which is helpful for reference. So if you are at all interested in shamanism, I think the concept of shamanism it spans across many cultures. So this, of course, is more so through the lens of Celtic shamanism, but I would say in reading about shamanism, the commonalities are, there's a lot of them. There's a lot of overlap between books on shamanism, so if Celtic shamanism isn't your gig, your thing, that you would still probably gain something from this one because shamanism is so universal as a concept and the practices overlap. So next we'll go into fairies, or the fair folk, however you like to refer to them. This is Fairies, A Guide to the Celtic Fair Folk by Morgan Daimler. Yes, I said that right. And this one doesn't have a lot of glare because it's a matte cover, so that's nice. And this was it the first book? I don't think it was the first book I read, but it was one of the first books I read on the fair folk, and that is a topic, an area of magic, and being, whether you view them to be more corporeal and tangible or as spirits, however you choose to view them, they're a topic that I'm very interested in. And as far as a reference guide, I don't think any are perfect, especially when you're getting into certain magical practices and defining things. In all of these, tarot, magic of all sorts. Everything's open to interpretation. There are various opinions and viewpoints, and because part of the beauty of magic is that we can all have these viewpoints and they can all be correct, because it's very difficult to prove anything. So, like I said, take it with a grain of salt. Nothing's perfect. I don't love every word of this, and there are areas that I disagree to some extent, but there's large sections on various types of fairies, of working with fairies, of experiences, things to look out for, things they like and dislike, seasonal and holiday related things, timing. You just get like a primer on fairies in general, and I think that this is great for that. So great reference for that, for if you're looking to work with the fair folk or fairies of more so Celtic background. Next is on herbs, and we have Cunningham's Encyclopedia of Magical Herbs as far as working with and having a reference for, sorry for that glare, herbs in a magical sense. This is my favorite. I have a few, and this is the one, it's well suited to be a reference book. This isn't one that I would say to read cover to cover unless you're very interested in memorizing correspondences and uses of herbs and a little bit of history on them. It is one that I think you could read cover to cover potentially, but it's a little bit more, it's just, here I'll show you. So you get the herb, and then you get the rundown on it, and it gives you things like its scientific name, you get folk names, the gender it's associated with, planetary correspondence, elemental, deity, the powers or keywords associated with it in terms of magic, and then you get its magical uses. So it's very helpful, and then of course you get a picture, which is kind of cool. It makes you feel like you're in some olden time when they had to draw it instead of you being provided a picture. I don't know, I like that aspect of it, but it's very comprehensive. There are a lot of various herbs and plants in this book, so I like to reference it for that. It's my go-to. Next, and a big one, is the Illustrated Signs and Symbols Sourcebook, an A to Z compendium of over 1,000 designs by Adele Nozedar. And this one is one of those kind of like signs and symbols books, so it draws from various cultures around the world. You get even things related to tarot, although I wouldn't, it's a little bit of a lot of things, so don't go to it for any one topic and think it's going to give you everything, but you can look for things like relating to sacred geometry, to numbers, to animals, to tarot, to ideas and symbols that you might see in the world, to objects and mythological, like you even have a bit on the idea of a question mark and how that connects, red string, scales, the tarot as a pictorial key of the universe, what is a talisman, sun sign. There are so many things. You can look up air and elements. There's a lot in here. There's pictures, there are some charts. So it gives you just a brief rundown of a lot of different things. If you're maybe you saw a lot of butterflies that day and you really wanted to look into and have a quick idea of like what are butterflies generally connected to. If I can even figure this out. And I don't know if butterflies are even in here, so that would be funny. If they aren't, it's also related. Oh wait, there's sections. Okay, I'm not going to really go through it, but there's a lot in here, and it just gives you a little bit about those sorts of things. So, good reference for all these different symbols and things we encounter in life in a more magical, esoteric, cultural, historical, mystical sense. Next, and for crystals, I have the Book of Stones, Who They Are and What They Teach Us, the revised and expanded edition by Robert Simmons, and I'm going to mispronounce her name and I apologize, Naisha Asian, with contributions by Hazel Raven. I'll put it up here so you guys can like read the names. This is what it looks like. I believe that there is a second volume to this. This is highly comprehensive as far as covering a lot of different types of crystals, precious and semi-precious stones, but there is a second one that covers whatever this one I think missed, although this covers pretty much all the major ones along with a bunch of others that aren't what I would consider to be very common. So you get things like keywords, but you get elements, chakra correspondences, but it also gives you a bit of the geological aspect with, say, where it falls on the Mohs hardness scale, which is important, especially if you're considering getting it wet or understanding the fragility of it. So you do get some of the geological, you get a little paragraph on that. Like for, here, let me pick something that's like a bit well known. Wow, I'm flipping to like all obscure crystals. What am I doing? Okay, Heliorite, and name given to a newly discovered magnesium silicate mineral, possibly a form of chrysolite from the northwest US. So you get the geology, then you get a bit from Robert Simmons, the one author, and then you get another section for each one for most of them, written by Naisha as well, and they go into the metaphysical, magical, mystical correspondences, uses, history. They really get pretty comprehensive with it, and you get a really big chunk. This so far has been the best book by far, hands down, on crystals I've come across as far as use and reference, even better than, say, what I would find online in searching. This, to me, I would go to before a computer. I'm trying to think. With tarot, the same. All of those books I would go to before I would try to Google search anything. As far as the magical herbs, I would probably start with the book, then go online, potentially for more detail. So yeah, a lot of these books are books that I will go to instead of the internet a lot of the time. If that means anything to you guys, I just find sometimes that the internet can be overwhelming and that there's a lot of fluff and potentially false or misinformed information that's not from credible sources. And rather than sift and sort through that only to be misled, I would rather work with reference books that are tried and true for me and that I trust and that, to me and as far as I've found, seem to be credible on these topics. These are all topics that it's not like we're working with physics where you can do something and test the outcome so strictly, so having credibility can be difficult. Credibility, I think, is accumulated by peers and success and notability, so credibility in these fields is a bit difficult to pin down, but they are credible in my opinion, and the people who have written them. So now we have and this is the last book, the Encyclopedia of Spirits, the Ultimate Guide to the Magic of Fairies, Genies, Demons, Ghosts, Gods, and Goddesses by Judica Isles, Judica Isles, I think. And I know that I'm not sure if they're all by the same author or by Judica, I should say, but there are other books of this nature that are published with similar format that appear to be a part of a set or a series. There's one on spells, and I believe that there are other ones. But this one is very comprehensive in terms of, well, like it said, the ultimate guide to the magic of fairies, genies, demons, ghosts, gods, and goddesses. So it goes across various cultures. I won't say all cultures because I can't say for sure, but it does seem to cover the majority of cultures that I can think of. And so you have the gods, the goddesses, ghosts, spirits, things from myths. So it's not limited. It's a very broad scope. And so you'll get a bit on all of them, their origin. So it could be something like a god, but it could be what is a genie. It could be a specific spirit that goes by a certain name in a culture, or a being within a certain culture that's related to mythology. And of course it's a very thick one, and I believe it's over 1,000 pages. Yeah, it's like 1,100 pages, and it's pretty light actually. The way that it was constructed, it's not super heavy, but it's one that I would highly recommend to just have a quick reference for any of those kinds of things. Of course, you can go online and look these up, but I like the way that this is structured, and I think it's a good starting base when you're doing any sort of workings or curious about any of these, I'll call them entities or beings that this book encompasses. So this is one that I really love and use quite often. So those are some reference books that when I went through my shelf, I found that I go to a lot on various topics. Those also give you an idea of the topics that I'm, say, interested in, because of course I reference them in those areas. But I know reference books can be a bit of a tricky subject or area that a lot of us aren't sure where to turn, and book reviews for me are very helpful because I like to know where I can go for a book based on a review and avoid picking up something that doesn't have a lot of substance or isn't very credible, and I've then wasted my money or time or resources on a book that doesn't really provide me with much. So as somebody who likes to view and consume content related to books, especially books of value in these categories, I thought I would provide my own with reference books that I find to be very helpful and credible for you guys. So if you found this helpful, please let me know. Let me know some of your favorite reference books or books that you go to read on various topics and return to for reference purposes. And I'm very curious. I like to have reference books, as you can see. So yeah, hopefully this was informative and helpful. Until next time. Oh, and like and subscribe if you enjoyed this content. I feel kind of weird asking or talking about that, but I shouldn't. So if you did like this, please actually like it physically and then subscribe. Until next time, bye guys.